So hello and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us at this special adult ed this morning. We are going to chat a little bit about this trip that we took. Now, how many of you were at our fundraiser that we came? Literally the whole room. Amazing. Love to see that. So thank you so much for your generosity and your presence there. Those financial gifts that were given allowed us to go on this trip and do these amazing things without a concern for what the cost was going to be. And we actually ended up having more money left over even after doing all these amazing things that you're going to see today. So, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do with those extra funds at the end. But to get started, what we're doing here today is I'm just going through essentially the whole week. We're going to go through and relive the week together. And I'll tell some stories as we move through it. Quick note, I know that Jeff and Ruth Klepper were meaning to be here, but Ruth's brother has had a downturn in his health and is unable to be here today. So our prayers go out to the Klepper family in this hard time. But, and then, you know, it's 9:15 on a Sunday morning. We have one of our participants, Katrina's here. She's helping me out with some tech. She's going to help me move things along. So this was on the left there. That's the picture of our crew gathered at the Klepper house on Friday morning before we are. Was it Friday? Was it Friday or Saturday? Was it Friday or Saturday? Saturday. It was Saturday. Saturday morning. She's already keeping me straight. A Saturday morning, we gathered at the Klepper house. They live about 10 minutes away from the airport, so we gathered there and carpooled to the airport. And then the other picture there is just for dramatic effect. That was in Alaska. That's the visitor center at the Mendenhall Glacier. So we're going to see the Mendenhall Glacier in a little bit, but I wanted to put that picture up just so you have a sense of where the visitor center is. It is elevated. And so when you see pictures of the glacier, they're from that visitor center. So you'll know sort of that frame of reference. Next slide. So here we are. We all got on the airport. We're all in the airplane in the airport doing the thing. Many of us haven't flown in years. It took us a hot minute to get through security. There were some snacks and like, I don't know what it was, but it took us a hot minute to get through security. So we were already like, all right, here we go. Off to a good start, right? But we did make it into the plane just fine. We all had we sort of got to group together. I tried to get us to all group together, but what I learned was that when you're flying Alaska Airlines, if you have an Alaska credit card, like I do, and you book your tickets using that card, those seats are locked in. They're not going to change it. If you book seats without an Alaska credit card, in like the like lowest tier, you know, cost, and you're not like, you can buy your seats like a la carte. You can just buy whatever seat you want. But we just selected seats, didn't pay any extra for them, and the seats that were not selected using the Alaska credit card, because you can only buy 6 seats at a time, and we had 9 people going. So the 3 people, the Klepper family and Katrina, who had their seats bought without my credit card, it was a roulette wherever they were going to sit. Sometimes they sat near us, sometimes they were over here, sometimes they were by themselves. So that was our first learning edge. Tess, you can see she was very thrilled. She bought a neck pillow on the way out. Served her well. Next slide. So this was our first stop. We made it to Seattle, the Seattle airport. Who's been to Seattle airport? Yeah, so there is that underground train system, very similar to like Denver. A lot of airports have these. And so we took that train into where there's like a food court area. And we were standing around. Now there's 9 of us, right? And this is a busy Seattle airport. There's not a lot of spaces to sit. And we're all thinking, well, what are we going to do? Do we want to go to the restaurant and pay like $25 for a taco? Or do we want to go to like, you know, the Lian Chang's, you know, food court kind of stuff? We decided to go to the food court, but then we're like, well, where are we going to sit? And then we get our food, go back to the gate. We don't know. Well, let's try to find seats here. And as soon as we did this, and this is one of the themes I'm going to talk about, is that where do we see God in these moments? Where do we see the Spirit moving? And for me, this was one of those moments, because as we said, okay, we're going to eat here. Y'all go and find stuff, and I'll see if I can find some seats. As soon as we did that, these 3 tables directly in front of us opened up, and we were able to just put them together. Like I mean, it's like, it's a random weird coincidence thing, but that's like movement of the spirit. I felt like we were absolutely in the right place at the right time at that moment. Next slide. And so then, when we got out of Seattle, we had a surprise stop in Ketchikan. Ketchikan is a very small city on the coast on the way up to Juneau. And sometimes Alaska Airlines will just make stops to pick people up, and then it just depends on how many people they have. Well, they had a lot of people on our flight. Our flight was full coming out of Seattle, and when we stopped down in Ketchikan, there was like maybe 20 people left on the airplane after that. And so we all got our own rows. So Hazel there is very thrilled about having her own row on an airplane. It's the first time that's happened for her. So she was thrilled. And then you see sort of what it looked like out the window as we began coming into Juneau there. It's absolutely gorgeous. Next slide. Then we land, and this is Juneau. This is 9 o'clock at night in Juneau. Yeah, you notice the sun hasn't really started going down yet. It was very bright out at 9 p.m. We gathered, we got our bags, no one missed their luggage, all the luggage arrived safely. We all checked bags, but we all made it. Next slide. We were picked up by Pastor Christy McGuire, who is pastor at Aldersgate United Methodist Church. This is their church, the way up to their front door. This is their sanctuary space. You can see from the signage out front, they are very in line with us here in terms of inclusivity and justice work. So it was a joy, and I knew that coming into it, but I didn't know all the like little signs they had. And they had on the windows there that goes across, there's like a bunch of different like Black Lives Matter and all these other sort of justice signs all throughout the windows. So that was super fun to see. Next slide. This, as we were welcomed into Aldersgate, this was the room that pretty much everything happened in. This was our sleeping quarters. You can see they had found and arranged inflatable mattresses for us all. Varying levels of effectiveness for keeping their air. I found myself regularly sleeping on the floor in the morning, but most of the mattresses stayed inflated. Now Tess's was this one right here, this big one right here, and it didn't really keep its air either, but it had so much extra that in the morning I'd look over and like I wouldn't see Tess in her bed because she had sunk down into it. But they supplied us with pillows and air mattresses so that we didn't have to bring those things. All we brought were sleeping bags or linens in terms of bedding. So that really helped us not have to travel with so much equipment. This also, as you see the 2 tables and the chairs around it, this was our meeting space. This was our gathering space. We slept here, we lived here, we played cards here, we ate here. This is where all of our meals were eaten. And we shared all this time together. We started our Vespers here. Every night we would have a Vespers where we would, just a little prayer service where we would connect. I invited, isn't that a nice word? I invited all the participants to lead a prayer throughout the time together. And everybody led one. That was my requirements that I invited them to do. And so everyone started off with a prayer, ended with a prayer, and then we did a little one-on-one, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So the next day, so we got in 9 p.m. at night, and then we essentially just got in, got settled, crashed. The next morning, we got up, it's Sunday morning, and we went to, how do you think you say that top word? Konokidi. It's guttural. So don't try to like pronounce it like, unless you're like sort of slurring consonants together. Konokidi. Yeah, once you let go of like trying to pronounce it right, just say it, Konokidi. And so Konokidi Northern Light United Church. This is the congregation that my father-in-law Phil Campbell was pastor at for a number of years, and is sort of the reason that this whole trip got together. And so we gathered there. We joined Konokidi for worship. Next slide. During worship, we found out somebody stood up, they do their like announcements, like pop-up announcements, and somebody announced that, no, it was a prayer time. And it was a prayer time and somebody made an announcement. Can you believe it? We're gonna do something like that, right? Somebody announced that they have this like housing program where downstairs in their lower level, they bring homeless families experiencing homelessness to stay in the church. And they were just finishing it up and they needed someone to turn linens. And so they said, hey, if you're free and able, can you help us turn linens? And so I got up and I volunteered us on the spot. And so after worship, we gathered and we got to change linens for these families. Next slide.
Temperature there.
Temperature there, I mean, it was lovely. It was like 70s and rainy. Just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. You can see like long sleeves and hoodies and stuff, jeans. Not really shorts weather unless you chip it off. So then this was the big moment. So we gathered for worship. It was lovely. We heard a beautiful service, a beautiful sermon, and then did a little service for them. And then we gathered with a couple of the native elders, and things got real. This is where things really got real for us. We heard about there was a church, and it was a church that was. Let me go back. So when colonizing started happening in Alaska, the churches, all the denominations, started parsing out Alaska and said, okay, you go here, you're going to go here, you get this area, you get that area. Well, the Presbyterians got Juneau. And so there was a Presbyterian church, and there was a lot of racism in this time too. This was like the 50s and 60s, and racism against Native Indigenous folks. So there was a Native church. It was Presbyterian, but it was a Native church, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. What's his name? Well, do you remember the guy's name? Pastor, Reverend, oh my gosh, this is why I was hoping Jeff would be here. Back me up on some of this stuff. There was a pastor who was the first Native Presbyterian pastor, the first ordained Native pastor. Walter Sokolov. Thank you, Evelyn. Walter Sokolov. Reverend Dr. So Walter Sokolov, he was the first Native Alaskan ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, and he was serving the Native Church. And by all records, they were growing, they were thriving, they were having weddings, they were having baptisms, they were like everything you could want in a church. It wasn't a high finance church, right? It didn't have a lot of money coming into it, but it had a great community base. So I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when I came back. The Presbyterian Church said, okay, Walter, we are closing your church, and you all can go be with this other church up north. You all can go start going to the white church. Yeah, this was, by all accounts from Walter Sokolov, not a conversation, not a request. This was a mandate. We're closing your church. And then he began doing tribal ministry up the island. So he started like just traveling and would go up the islands and minister to people and travel all around. And he did great work. And he is an icon in Alaska. But we'll see the Walter Sokolov Center a little later. But the story and the colonial story that was told to the people of, at the time, Northern Light United Church. This was a uniting of three churches. There was a Methodist church, there was a Presbyterian church, and there was a congregational church that all came together for this Northern Light United Church. That was the story that was told to the people who went to Northern Light. Now, the natives who were at the other church, they knew what had happened. They, sort of knew what had happened, but didn't really know. And the story was this was a joining of all of our churches together. It was this joyous, beautiful thing. That's what the people there were told, and that's what people believed. My father-in-law, Phil Campbell, got to know Walter, got to know Dr. Sokolov, and spoke with him and spoke directly about the closing of that church, and found that it was not amicable, that it was essentially the white church coming in and closing the Native community. And he went to Ohio to the Presbyterian records to find records like what was baptism rate, what was marriage rate, what were the attendance rates, and showing this thriving community, which is not the story that was told. This was told that a bunch of churches were struggling. They came together to form a united church. So all that history, can we go to the next slide? All that history was told by this beautiful woman here named Vivian. She's a native elder, and she attended the church that was closed. So when she was a little girl, she attended the church that was closed, and then started attending Northern Lake. And then when all this came up, this was 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, even. Like, this is not ancient history. This is brand new for them. And they have a healing commission, a healing task force, which is dedicated to healing this wound, because it still is a wound that has never been tended to. And how can we heal this? How can we heal it and make it healing to the Native community in their tradition, in their culture, in their practices, not sort of what the white church is going to feel like it's going to be healing. So they said, you know, we're not just going to be giving money and being said, okay, that's fine. Like, you can't just buy this out and say we're done. For them, she talked about how ceremony and storytelling is very important, and bearing witness to storytelling is important. And so that was where we had affirmed, like, there is a delegation from the PCUSA that is traveling to Juneau this October at the beginning of the month, and they are going to essentially participate in a ceremony of telling this story and beginning the work of healing and reparations. Not writing a check and washing our hands with it, but actually being in community and relationship to say, you are hurting, our institution was the cause of that, and we want to do better. So let's build relationship. And so we said that we would commit to hosting a watch party. And so I hope you all will come on October 7th, or maybe it's the 8th, 7th or 8th. Keep up, you'll see news for it. We're going to host a watch party where they're going to stream the service, and we'll be able to gather and watch that service and bear witness to it. She said very specifically that would be impactful and helpful and meaningful for their community to know that their story is being told and witnessed by other people outside of Juneau. So that's what we're doing. It was heavy, y'all. It was heavy. We talked, it was Sunday morning right after church. We're talking about racism, colonialism, oppression, terrible hard stuff. And so then, next slide. We went and played cards and ate some lunch, and kind of debriefed a little bit. And you know, some folks made a coffee stop and got some lattes, and just sort of had a little bit of decompression time, a little bit of debrief time, so that we could then, next slide, go check out the docks. So then we walked down to the Juneau docks, and this is right on the pier. You see the cruise ships. They usually get about 3 or 4 or 5 in a day. And they account for a large portion of the industry and the business that comes into Juneau. Now, the cruise lines own a lot of the stores that are right off the cruise line. So there are some native-owned stores that have space there and that run and survive COVID and keep going. But for the most part, the cruise lines are kind of insular. And so if you go on a Juneau cruise, and you go off and you look, and if you want to support a native business, you have to like see in the window it says native owned. And there's only a handful of them in the like dozens that are in the area. The rest of them are owned and operated by the cruise industries. Yeah.
I'm thinking some people don't know there's no roads to know that road. Probably should kind of talk about it.
Thank you, Sandy. I will certainly talk about that. I'm also going to have a Q&A, so if I forget anything, go correct me. That is absolutely right. We had to fly in or take cruise lines in because there are no roads. It is surrounded by ice fields. It is the only capital in the United States where, besides Hawaii, that you cannot drive to. So that's fun fact. And then all across the pier, you'll see on the left side there these are their totem poles. They tell the story of the clans and the different moieties or animal spirits that they owe their allegiance and identity through. And it was fun. There were a lot of them down there. They just erected like another dozen or something. Because the Tlingit are the people who we primarily interacted with. The Tlingit and the Haida and Shamishan are the three who are like predominant in this area. There are dozens of native tribes in Alaska. It's huge space. But those are the three that we interacted most with. And the Tlingit are kind of a fierce, they're pretty fierce people. And we heard, our guide at the tour center that we'll see later said, hey, you want to come and colonize us, you do you, and then we're going to throw up another 12 totem poles. Like their cult, they refuse to let their culture go. And it is so inspiring to see. Next slide. So after we walked around downtown a little bit, we made it out, we went out the road a little bit, and we found this like series of docks and piers that had been built up. You see that the tide is currently low, so you can see kind of where the water generally comes up to where the moss is growing up to. But then this is just a look at downtown Juneau. This is over here. This is Mount Roberts, and this is Mount Juneau. This is a nice little hikeway in here that we ended up hiking into a little bit. And next slide. So we just had fun. We were walking around. It was a hard, heavy morning, and then we just had a good time. And you can see that, like, from just sitting and enjoying, or just being a part of this open air and embracing it all. Isaiah threw a lot of rocks into the water. He skipped a lot of rocks on that, a lot of rocks on that trip. It was just it was a time to center ourselves in the peace and beauty of the landscape. Next slide. So this is again that dock that we followed. You can see the cruise ships over there on the left, and this is the channel here. On the left is Mount Roberts. On the right is I'm looking at Evelyn. Evelyn, what is on the right? There is, what is on the right? It is there. So it's another island, Douglas Island. I just had to say the word. Douglas Island is there on the right. And so there is this channel of seawater that's in between. Next slide. Right, we saw this, which was very, very cool. Next slide. That is, of course, a fountain. We got some pretty cool pictures. Very cool now. This is a new fountain. We saw some whales way in the distance on one part, but we didn't see any like breaching like this. But this was at the end of that large field. Next slide. And then at the end of our day, and then that was our first full day. That was one day. And then we came back and we did some vespers, a little prayer service, which featured some one-on-ones. So this was a chance to break out of our large group and talk directly to one person. These one-on-one partners were people that were connected at the start, and then every day we did our vesper service with a little one-on-one time, and it was the same person throughout the entire week, so that folks could build relationship and comfort, so that they could reflect on things, talk things out. We then came back and processed together as a large group. Next slide. The next day, we went to the Mendenhall Glacier. Now, this was the path up to the glacier. We traversed some streams. There's this nice, it is the Pacific Northwest, right? So it is rainforest, the Tongass rainforest is what we were walking through here. Next slide. So this is Mendenhall, right there. And this is Nugget Falls. That's where we were walking to. This body of water that you see there in front, behind Isaiah, is runoff. That is Mendenhall Lake. It is the runoff from the glacier. Next slide.
And I just say that in 1966, over there, glacier was over the top of that island.
Yeah, sure can. I have pictures of that. Yeah. So this was Nugget Falls that we hiked to and got a nice little group shot. This Nugget Falls is also glacial runoff. And you can see it is flowing. This wasn't a trickle. that we had heard, so we learned in the visitor center that all glaciers go through two periods. There's the growing and receding phases, right? And Mendenhall has been in a receding phase for a while. And now what we've noticed is that because of climate change, the receding has been expedited. It is receding much greater than usual. So we're already in, so it's not that climate change caused the receding of it, it's just expediting it. So usually they said in normal time you get anywhere from 50 to 100, maybe even 200 feet of recession in a year. That's how far it'll fall back. This past year it receded 800 feet. So 4 times the very maximum that they normally recede is what it received this past year. So yeah, Nugget Falls was flowing because it was melting. Next slide. This is Pastor Christy there on the left. She was our host pastor. Such a joy to get to know her. And we did a little climbing around on the rocks there. Next slide. So there's Mendenhall. So yeah, I'm sure, Sandy, you said that it was like out here in the 60s, right?
That was completely covered.
Completely covered, right all here, right? Yeah, so when I was there about a decade ago, this part was covered. Right there, that was covered. And we're gonna see some more pictures. Next shot. There it is. Yeah, so there's the glacier as it is today. Now that is just the very tip of it, right? That is the fingertip of this giant ice field. So it's like, yeah, in probably another 10, 20 years, that will probably not be visible from the visitor center. But it's not that the glacier is gone, it's just its finger is no longer sort of easily accessible. We couldn't get right up to it because it has receded so much. It is, I mean, you can see what the rocks are like here. It is a major hiking expedition with like crampons and like hiking gear in order to get and actually touch it. Next slide. This is a shot from the visitor center. So you can see Mendenhall Glacier and the Nugget Falls there. I have this one here so you can just get a visual. You said, Sandy, in the 60s, it was probably out to about here, about this island right here.
No, it was just along that side of the see the tip of that side island, yeah.
Like right in here?
Yeah.
Cool. In the 20s, there was no Mendenhall Lake. That lake is only about 100 years old. That's how much it's receded in the last 100 years, to give you a sense of that. Next slide. So here's a visual image. So there's that picture of Sandy, that's about where you saw it in the 60s, top left. And then the bottom one is the 80s, you can see how much it's receded. Top right is 2003, and then this is 2010. And even from 2010, can you go back? So you get a sense of where it is now, like locate this rock face right here, and this is all rock here. Next slide. Next slide. Yep, next one. Oh, you're going backwards. Wait. Next, yeah, forwards. Space bar. Yeah, you're good, you're good, you're good. You're good. Let's go. Yeah, I know. Great. So you can see there's that rock face, right? 13 years ago, where's that rock face? It's totally covered, right? Next slide. So that was the morning. Then we came home and are back to the church and we started doing some work because it's just service group, right? These fine folks put us up, and so we can give back. We can do some service. So we tore out this big pallet. This was an Eagle Scout project. This was like a kitchen. They had a preschool, but it didn't get sealed. It wasn't really done super well. They wanted it out, so we tore it out. We sure did. Next slide. We also cleaned out a balance beam that was dug into the ground and covered with moss. Their children's school closed. They couldn't afford to keep it going, and so they don't really have need for like a balance beam that's covered with moss. They had this big, this thing right here, this bin was over here against the wall, just had toys haphazardly thrown in it. We found a lot of spiders in there. The girls did not like the spiders in there very much, but they worked through it. So we took it out, we cleared out all this, we built up some of this dirt along the sides so that they had a better incline there for water runoff. Next slide. And then there was this thing in the ground. This used to be like a play structure, and then it kind of broke down. Now it's just this sort of weird thing, and it like wobbled, so it wasn't strong. They wanted it gone. And so we said, okay, let's see if we can get it gone. Next slide. We got it gone. You were able to push it out. It was just sort of buried, and then they like twisted the bolts until they snapped. It was just wood that was covered in plastic. So after we got all the pieces broken down, I was able to buzz slides. We got the plastic off, disposed of that, and then the wood. Next slide was they said just have a bonfire and burn it. So you'll see that coming up in a bit. This is how it looks afterwards. Isn't that nice? Doesn't that look so nice? This gravel here is where this big wooden kitchen thing was all broken down, rust was, and then that picnic table was where that big green thing was. And so now they have this nice space for their families to use after worship. Next slide. We were tired. They worked really hard, and so then it was time for dinner and dessert. So we had to figure out a way to make an ice cream cookie sandwich by putting ice cream in between cookies. She had a thrill about that. Next slide. That was day 2. Day 3. Day 3, we went up with Pastor Christy and her daughter Denali to have a nature walk and a foraging lesson from a native elder. We gathered here, and there you see these segways that were part of another like tour, and they were chatting around, and we had planned to do communion here. So we shared communion here, talking about how we can find meaning and connection with each other, even amid like all the like distractions of our world. Next slide. This is our native elder who taught us how to move around. Her name, what was her name?
Vivian.
What was her name?
Vivian?
Vivian? Wasn't Vivian the one? Vivian was the one from LPD, wasn't it? Oh, I'm mixing them up.
Yes.
Okay, so this is Vivian. Hey, there she is. She's great. She gave us this great lesson on wild celery, which is what this is. And she said, you know, most people could brush up against it, not a big deal. But some people, if you brush up against it, it'll give you a really nasty rash. It'll be really bad. And then if you try to shower, then it'll just like rub all over you, and then you'll just have this nasty. And she freaked out several of our girls for our nature walk. We also had a conversation about photography and how it's very important when talking with a native person to ask if you can take their photo. Colonizers have used photography to claim and own land and identities for so long. She agreed to it. She said she was perfectly fine with that photo. But just today that we asked for consent for all these photos. Next one. Here we are. You can see Hazel very thrilled to be walking along the local celery. But then you just see sort of these epic trees that we walked through on this foraging hike. Next one. This was the end of our hike. We made it out to the beach. This is where we had lunch. Next photo. Here we are on our logs having lunch. We packed lunches together and just got to eat here. We had a lovely conversation about colonizing because her father was from a native village and experienced colonizing firsthand. When we think about colonizers, we think about, she talked about 1492 and people coming, you think 1492, well, 1492 happened and no one was in Alaska. 1592, they still hadn't experienced. 1692, 1792, now the Russians come in, and so the Russians are coming into Alaska at this point. 1892, now we start having American influence. So 500 years of practiced colonialism before they ever got to Alaska. And so for Alaska natives, she talked about how we're witnessing colonization today. This isn't a thing that has happened, it's a thing that is continuing to happen. And that's why they're so resolved with their the Alaska Native Corporation. So this is what Alaska did. Alaska Natives, they got together and they sued the United States government for rights to their land. And they won. Yeah. So the Alaska Native Corporation was built and sued the government. They won. And now the Alaska Native populations have a lot of rights given to them that we don't see in other parts of the country. There is not a reservation system in Alaska. There's this corporate system. And so the native population receives profits from the land. Any oil drilling or any the like state taxes that come in. Every year, you, as a resident of Alaska, you receive a kickback check, every single person. And it's usually something like $1,500. It's not insignificant. And that is because the native corporation sued and won.
That isn't just the natives.
No, that's not. That is everyone living in Alaska. Okay, so then this is us. We gathered this right here. We learned a lot about this. This is a sacred plant right here. This is called Devil's Club. And it grows super tall. You can see this is where land is, and it grows super tall. It's got spines on the bottom of it. It's this big leaf, and it's used for salves and like itches, burns. It's antibacterial. It's like anti everything that you want that you don't want in you. And so we learned a lot about that. I got myself some Devil's Club salve at a local native-run store later that trip. Next slide. The smallest Costco in the world. We then went to the smallest Costco in the world that afternoon. I had to take a picture of it because it's so tiny. And because we were going to be serving dinner at a local food kitchen. So we went to Costco. Next slide. Hazel was super stoked to see this tiny Costco. She'd never been to Costco, and so got to see a small one. Next slide. Here we are at the Glory Hall, where we made this delicious spaghetti dinner. Next slide. Everybody worked really hard. I sort of delegated, put a lot of people to work, and then they got to work, and they really did. They made this lovely brownie dish. They cleaned up. Next slide. Here they are in service. So we got different kinds of salad. We had meatballs. We had spaghetti. It was a really meaningful time, and we also got to talk a little bit about mental health. There was a woman who was experiencing a mental health incident at the time, and she used a lot of curse words with us and seemed very angry with us. And so we were able to, next slide, when we gathered for Vespers that night, we talked through and who is worthy of love, and is she worthy of love? Yes. Okay, cool. So what about you? And that's where it got hard, right? It's like, oh yeah, of course, a woman with mental health issues, of course, yeah, she's deserving of love. What about us? Are we deserving of love? Well, it's like, well, yeah, but like, so maybe we can cut ourselves a break, right? When we mess up, when we mess up, when we're not perfect, it's okay. We're still deserving of love. So that was a long day and a hard day, but a good day to debrief from. Next slide. We learned a card game that night called Cabo. This was taught to us by Sam Plepfer, and it was a hit. We loved it. It was super fun. I'll teach it to you sometime. Next slide. Then the next day, we went out to the Shrine of St. Therese. These are ravens. Very smart birds, very large blackbirds. They're all over. Ravens and eagles are the two major moieties, those two animal spirits that we talked about that clans owe their allegiance to. Eagle and raven, and they are everywhere. We saw bald eagles all over the place, and we saw ravens all over the place too. Next slide. So this was the Catholic shrine. This was out the road a little ways. We went out the road about 30 minutes into Catholic territory. And there was this shrine of St. Therese. This was a beautiful location. And all dabbled along this little island were these shrines, the Stations of the Cross, the last days of Jesus, and that message. We also saw a shrine to for all the quotes victims of abortion out here. And that helped us have a conversation about how this is a beautiful spot and there's some beautiful story here. And it was beautiful before the Catholics came in and put up shrines talking about their faith. Right? And so when we see this, it's really easy to go, oh, this shrine, and oh, it's beautiful, and oh, the Catholics must have made this place. No, the Catholics took this place. And so as we're here, next slide, it was beautiful. We hiked all around. This is where we saw whales off the coast here. Next slide. We hiked down this little rocky face here. We see we saw some more Devil's Club. Right up
There.
wild mustard right over here. Next slide. But all the while, like reflecting on the beauty of this land. And this shrine to Saint Therese, who is probably a beautiful woman, wonderful, did wonderful work, is also kind of a shrine to colonization. Especially having such deep relationships with the native peoples who we've heard from. Like, what was here before they decided to plunk a building down and build a road to it? What was here before then? We don't know. Next slide. Then it was time for dinner. Our dinner crew got to work while the rest of us played Cabo. Next slide. Then the next day, we went for another hike. Yes, we did. We got our steps in on this trip, y'all. At least 10K a day. So this was a hike up the Gold Flume Trail. Next slide. This was a common sight where the pack was moving and Jeff was like way up front. He's a man who can hike. Next slide. This was the Gold Flume Trail. So this was when Americans came in and started taking the gold out of the mountains. This flume was built, and it is now no longer a functioning mine. But you can hike up this flume, and at the top there is a mining museum that we got to see. Next slide. And here's Jeff talking about what a rare sight it is to be able to visualize a solid, like such a steep ascent. This is a mountaintop that is, 7,000 feet above sea level that we are at, like nearly at the base of, and you can just see up the entire thing. Next slide. Here we are making our way back to the Gold Flume Trail, beautiful sights all the way around. I just included these so you can see the beautiful sights. I don't have much else to story here. Next slide. And then it was time for a little R&R time in the sanctuary. Of course, we're throwing balls in the sanctuary. Why not, right? Next slide. This was the next day. This was our last full day. And these were all the wood pallets that we had, and they needed to be broken down, so we put them on the fire. Next slide. Samantha Klepfer learned how to use a circular saw right here. This is her first time using a circular saw. Next slide. She also got pretty good at throwing wood pallets on the fire. That bonfire got hot really big and burned through it quick. It only took about an hour to burn through all that wood. Next slide. So it was raining most of the trip, or at least wet most of the trip. This is the last day and it was gorgeous. This is the Alaska Heritage Center, the Walter Sokolov building. And this is sort of the cultural center of the Native Corporation. They have this whole plaza. Next slide. So this is us looking at some Native art. This is us in front of a replica of a clan house, a traditional clan house. That inside they would have like, do you remember the number, Katrina? How many people lived inside these clan houses? It was like a room no bigger than this. And it was something like 60 or 70 people.
I think 40.
40? I want to say 42, but I thought maybe it was a little under. So between 40 and 60 people living in a clan house the size of this room. Next slide. And like villages would have like several clan houses. So then we decided to get ready to fly like a raven or sort of like an eagle. This is the tram. This is the tram that goes up Mount Roberts. It's the tallest tram in North America. It was I don't like heights. I was scared the whole way. I didn't like it. The kids seemed to do fine. Next slide. Here we go. We went up really high. I didn't like it. Next slide. It was really high, but I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I was glad to get off of it. But you can see this. So that's across the way, right? Beautiful. You can see for miles. It's not usually like this. It's usually soft in. So that's the Douglas Island across the way. Next slide. Up there we had a little bit more cultural immersion, checking out the wingspans with eagles. Next slide. And then a well-deserved dinner. This is our one dinner out on our last night at just one of the most gorgeous places I could imagine. Wow. This overlook up at the top of the mountain was just amazing. Really good food too. Highly recommend this spot if you go. Really good food. And not any more expensive than like the food down below. So it was great. Next slide. And that was it. That was our last night. Moving away from the tram, we stayed out late. As you can see, the sun started to go down. I think we got back around 10 that night. And it was a very lovely trip. We really took our time on this walk back. Next slide. And then the next day it was time to go, and all that we were left with was our memories and our stamps from our tram. So everyone got stamped on the tram. So we had our last little picture there. Next slide. So I'm gonna ask some Q&As now, but I just got a few last photos I want to go through here because it was such a meaningful trip. Next slide. Everybody had such a joy to be able to be there. Next slide. And you can just see I can see the joy and the wonder and the curiosity in these young people's heads. Next slide. As we got to know each other, we had fun. It was smiles all the way. There really wasn't much drama anywhere. Next slide. And it really was a good time. It wasn't hard to get big smiles for photos. Last slide. So thank you, Les. That was a Sam Puffer. So that's our trip. What questions do you have? Anybody have questions? Yeah, over here.
From the time you left Minneapolis to the time you landed in Juneau, what kind of time?
What kind of time was it? So the question is, how long is the trip from Minneapolis to Juneau? It's about 9 hours total, with a couple hours on the ground in Seattle. Yep. There's a lot of, but it went quick. Here to Seattle was a long flight, but it wasn't that bad. And then we had a couple hours down, and then we got back on. And then it wasn't straight from Seattle to Juneau. We had a stop in Ketchikan. So then we went down again and came back up. And so it actually, I didn't think it went by, I thought it went by pretty quick. Next up, yeah, team.
We were in the capital. What did you learn about the legislature, Congress, whatever?
Yeah, they do have a Republican governor. And so the question is, we were in the capital of Alaska, and what did we learn about the legislature and Congress and so and so? Essentially, it didn't come up much. We focused more and heard more about the experiences of Native peoples, and
aren't they in the legislature a lot now?
So what we heard was the experiences of Native peoples on the ground and their frustrations with the American government, and that it's them. So the phrase that we heard that stuck with me was that to Native peoples, they weren't really concerned with America. They're frustrated, they don't like it, they won a lawsuit, they're doing their thing. But essentially, they're not really concerned because the way they see it, they were there way before America, tens of thousands of years before America. And they're going to be there after America, is how they feel about it. That's how they feel about America. They were here decades, generations, hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands of years before America, and they're going to be around after America, whenever America goes away. That's how they feel about it. And in the meantime, they have to live in this new system and try to make do and try to hold on to what they have. They don't, it's impossible to hold on to their traditional ways. A lot of that was destroyed in racism and the boarding schools, but you still see Native totem poles all over the place. They're speaking the language. We get introduced, much like we hear our Native friends here speak in their native tongue when they do introductions. They do introductions there where they introduce themselves based on who their mother was and who their father was and where their ancestors come from and where they come from and what they do. It's a long introduction for people. And that, what was the last thing that I was going to say? Oh, and that, they struggle because they have this Republican governor who is making it harder for them to get around. The ferry system that travels between the islands, many people utilize a lot, has been devalued and demonetized and is struggling to stay up. So it's harder for people to get around because they've come to rely on these systems that were forced upon them, and now they're being taken away. And so it's a struggle, but for them it's they'll go away eventually and we'll still be here. Or they'll learn from us and they'll do better. Those are sort of the options. Next part. Any other questions?
Oh, right, so I just, they are Americans. I mean, sometimes I have a brother lives in Hawaii. Many times, people don't think that Hawaiians are American. Alaskans, they are Americans. I hear what you're saying.
Technically, according to us, they are, yes.
Well, don't they get benefits as Americans? They pay taxes, yes. They get social security, they get Medicare. Okay, but
If they go through those systems and work through those sort of systems. Because it's not that you just get those things, right? You don't just turn something and you get it. You have to go through systems and register and fill out forms and do these things. And that is, a lot of folks, some folks have no interest, don't know that that's a thing, don't care to. But sure, yeah, there are certainly some systems that they can take advantage of.
and plans are financed. The plans do get money for every person in the plans where there are on the other islands
So the plans are financed, sure, yeah, they do kickbacks too.
So it's what you're, it's like, so it's more than their religion, I understand.
Certainly.
They're being that, and it's their, well, it's like when I get together with my Norwegian and Swedish relatives, they can all go back, to where they came from, how they got here. But I understand, so thank you for sharing. I mean, it's more than just, oh, well, I got this background.
Right.
They're still living.
Yeah, that's who they are. Like, it's sort of this word Ubuntu, that's an African word, that I am because we are. I am because we are. This idea that I am not me. I am the product of my parents and their ancestors. Like, that's who I am. The good and the bad, that's who I am. I'm not this like lone entity. That is a very, that's sort of like westernized, colonized identity, this isolated entity that like doesn't have associations with our ancestry. For them, if you want to know who I am, I have to tell you about my 3 generations back on my mother's side and 3 generations back on my father's side and all their kids, so that you know who I am and where I'm coming from. Yeah, what's up? Yeah.
The church that hosted you, what was their main focus? What's their mission?
Alder's Gate. What is the main focus of Alder's Gate?
Yeah.
To be compassionate, loving children of God. I don't know. I mean, they're a United Methodist Church. Sure. Yeah. I mean, they do. So they used to have a children's school. I didn't get into the nitty-gritty of their programming. Mostly because it seemed less into programming and more into community development and engagements. I'm sure they have some programs here and there, but it's more of a big tent where people gather and know each other. That was my sense of it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Other questions? In the back, yeah.
Is there any opportunity for them to restart their native church?
The question is there an opportunity to restart their native church? I don't know. I didn't get the sense that there was an interest in doing that. That it's less about, it's more that recognizing, no, that's destroyed and that's gone. And what we're doing is we're navigating our reality right now. And how can we heal? Starting a new separate community is not, in the sense I got, that's not the sense of healing. The sense of healing is being seen and recognized and being a part of a community as opposed to an other community. So I would get the sense that that's not something that's really interesting. Then no one really has. So from that native community led by Walter Soblev, about half of them went to Kanokidi, and then about half of those people stayed. So it was about a quarter of the community from that country that now are still part of the church, and the rest of them are like, why would we be a part of that? Why would we do that? They actively told us they didn't want us a part of their thing. Yeah.
Those that chose not to go in, did they form another congregation or they just, no?
Not that I'm aware of. Native communities, they have their potlatches, which are like potlucks. They have clan gatherings, they do stuff amongst their clans all the time. You know, when someone dies in Eagle Clan, Raven Clan throws the potluck and donates a bunch of stuff, and then they give that to Eagle Clan. It's this reciprocity that the clans do together to keep balance. And I would assume that they just are sort of like, well, that was a thing, and now we're gonna keep doing our indigenous stuff.
I always felt, so I've been there 6 months, and we traveled all over. And I always felt that the community has this beauty about them and the nature about them, and they really do worship God in the same manner. They can live by a Bible because they really, the books are really expensive, very still to this day. Bread used to be $7 a loaf, what is it now?
Oh, I don't know what the cost
You
of
buy
bread
at
is.
Costco, was it cheaper?
You know, I don't remember the cost of bread. You know, there was, a lot of things happened, and that was one thing that did not stick in my memory, unfortunately. So
Yeah, the natives do take care of themselves.
they do, yeah, absolutely. And as they did for tens of thousands of years before we went there, right? And there was this church that was started, like I said, you know, they worked with the Russians and they did a lot of trading. The Americans bought the land and owned it, and so they said, okay, I guess we'll have to deal with Americans now. And so they started dealing with Americans, working through American systems, learning English, working through. Walter Sokolov got ordained, for crying out loud, right? They're working through these systems. And then when those systems stop working for them and they stop working, well, they go back to the stuff that worked for them for generations. Any other questions? I probably have time for one or two more. Yeah, Frank.
Just one really interesting note, obviously, the state is thousands of miles away from Washington DC, and has always had a really complicated relationship with our federal government. They had a state that leans Republican, but Mary Peltola won the race for the at-large. Of course, it's amazing, just one person in the House of Representatives oversees the entire massive state. I believe she's the first Native American member of Congress Alaska's had to date.
Yeah.
And she beat Palin by a slim margin.
She did.
But it was a landmark accomplishment.
So recognizing, sorry, what was her name again?
Mary Peltola.
Mary Peltola.
I believe that's how she says last name.
Yeah.
Peltola.
Mayor Peltola, first representative, Native representative within the House of Representatives. They have one seat, right? Two senators, very Republican. The one seat is because of the population density of Alaska. It is the biggest state in America and the lowest population density. It is, I mean, it's vast and empty in terms of population density. It is full of this. Trees and forests and ice fields and animals and
Rain, 15 feet of rain, catch a can.
there is a lot of rain, that's right. There is a lot of rain.
And heat.
Any other questions? Yes.
The youth, and the, was that all amicable through the whole thing, or was there, you know?
You want to get the tea? You want to hear the drama? No, the youth that were with me, were they amicable the whole time? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was great. It was a great group. You know, we didn't have 50, right? And so, but we had, so it wasn't like you could do stuff and like not be seen. Everybody, you know, we had 6 youth on this trip, and they all got along famously. They're all pretty chill, pretty laid back. It was a pretty solid trip. Is that fair, Trina? Was there drama that I didn't know about? Was there drama in the group chat that I wasn't invited to?
You're still on this?
They had a group chat that they didn't invite me to, which is fine. But as far as I know, there was not a lot of drama between them. It's gonna be our last question. We gotta get.
It's something for us to think about.
All right, let's leave it up. Something to think about.
I don't beat around the bush.
It's true.
So you kind of left us with a kind of feeling that I think I know where you're coming from in terms of your feelings about our US relationships with Native Americans. I feel really strongly when it comes.
Okay.
So how do you leave it on a positive note? In the sense of working together towards the resolution, because I got a feeling from you that, you know, how do we work towards resolution? And I feel that some way right here in our church with our Native Americans.
Right.
That, you know, they're there, and we're here, and we're on their land, but how do we work together towards the resolution where I feel we're contributing,
Sure.
but it doesn't always come back.
So, yeah, no,
I'm driving to.
yeah, I get you. So the question is, how do we work towards a resolution where, you know, as a product of colonization, how do we have relationship and resolution with indigenous peoples, even here locally or nationally? It's a great question. I don't have an answer for it. But the only thing that I would say that having learned from this trip is that, a resolution, right, a solution that we say, there we go, we fixed it, is not the case. Like, so we should not look for a resolution, and I'm just using those words, I know, I'm sure you meant something more nuanced than that, but I think it's easy to say, how do we fix this problem? How do we fix this? We don't. We stay in community, we stay in relationship, and we heal, right? So who here has experienced an emotional trauma in their life? Anyone? Anyone? Come on, you're in America. So think about your own traumas, right? How can a stranger help you work through one of your traumas? Can they? I would venture it's very hard for a stranger to help someone work through a trauma. Now, unless it's like a random act of kindness sort of thing, that sort of gives you a way forward. But what I would encourage is relationship building. And not from a place of like, I want to fix this, but from a place of like authentic, hey, I just want to know how your life is, and I want to like see how you're doing, and like, I don't know anything, I want to learn more. And not like, teach me your ways, but like, we have, we have a native sweat lodge here on our property. And there is a book out there that you can sign up for more information about it. You can walk out there right now today, and there's a book hanging on the shed that says sign here for more information. You put your information there, the leaders of that group will contact you and invite you to a sweat. Go to a sweat with them. Meet some local natives who are not part of DIW, who are not part of social justice, who are just literally living their lives, right? I know it's really easy, us sort of on the front lines of social justice where we know other social justice advocates, but it's harder to know like just the people, right? Just the people and the cultures. That's one way to start building those connections. And I have a movie on the Tlingit people that I bought on this trip that I am hopefully going to see if our lovely librarian might accept it to our library. And so I have it, and it's DVD. And I'll talk to you, and we'll make announcements about that. I'm sure.
You know, I gotta say though, for the people here that have gone to South, we have done horrible jobs down here with our neighbors.
Okay.
Alaska is actually given, they have the plants, they have freedom. They are not like we are.
Yes.
They're not, the poverty's not there, the self-assurance is not there. They fly the children all over to play basketball games and football games. They come more to the United States than.
Yes, the natives in Alaska do have it better than the natives in Minnesota, for
That's
example.
so much to
We do,
do.
absolutely. And the reason that is, again, is the natives in Alaska formed a corporation and sued the United States and won.
Yes.
The natives in the rest of the country weren't able to unify in that way and go through those. It's remarkable to me that they learned how to do that and then did it. I talk about like miracles. And so this is a big, and we're gonna wrap up here in just a sec, but this is a big question for us too, is what can we do to help our local, like to help change our systems? Can we change a reservation system and build a corporate system here? Boy, that's a big job, isn't it? But like, we can dream, we can talk about it, we can be a part of recognizing that there is another way, right? What does that look like? I don't know what that looks like, but keep learning about it, keep talking to people about it, keep advocating for it. You know, if you talk to people at DIW, have them talk to me about it, I'm talking to Louise about it, all we can do is try to heal and move forward. There is no fix button, there is just, whatever we can do to try to heal. And healing comes from intentional respect and intentional relationship building. Not from a place of like teaching you how to do better, but from a place of you're a person who has a different life story than I do. And that's valid and like worth being in relationship with. Even if it makes me feel uncomfortable, even if you do things different. So thank you all for your time here today, for being here.